Once the undisputed king of the American auto industry, General Motors was a symbol of innovation, power, and national pride. But today, it's a shadow of what it once was. Factory closures, bailouts, and a reputation in decline. How did the giant fall so far? Stick around, because the story of GM's downfall is more shocking than you think. In the early 20th century, America was a land of promise and possibility. The Industrial Revolution was in full swing, and the automobile was rapidly transforming from a luxury for the few into a symbol of freedom and progress for the many. At the heart of this revolution stood General Motors, GM, a company whose story would become a quintessential tale of ambition, innovation, success, and the perils of complacency. This video provides a comprehensive overview of GM's rise, its pivotal role in the automotive world, and a deep dive into the 5 most significant reasons behind its decline. The story begins in 1908, in Flint, Michigan. William C. Durant, a visionary entrepreneur who had already made his mark in the carriage business, saw the future in automobiles. He founded General Motors as a holding company, quickly acquiring Buick, Oldsmobile, Cadillac, and several other car makers. Durant's strategy was bold: build a portfolio of brands to serve every customer, from the working class to the wealthy elite. But rapid expansion came at a cost. By 1910, GM was drowning in debt, and Durant lost control of the company to a group of bankers. Undeterred, he started Chevrolet with Louis Chevrolet, and within a few years, used the profits to buy back into GM, regaining control in a dramatic twist of fate. Durant's resilience and willingness to take risks laid the foundation for GM's culture, a culture that would fuel both its meteoric rise and, later, its most challenging crises. The Sloan era and the power of brands. After Durant's final departure, Alfred P. Sloan took the helm. Sloan's genius was in organization and marketing. He positioned each GM brand, Chevrolet, Pontiac, Oldsmobile, Buick, and Cadillac, to target a specific market segment, ensuring that GM had a car for every American. This strategy, combined with innovative financing options, made car ownership accessible to millions. By the 1930s, GM had overtaken Ford as America's top automaker. The company thrived during the post-war boom, riding a wave of prosperity that saw highways crisscross the nation and car culture become deeply embedded in American life. At its peak in the 1960s, GM controlled more than half the U.S. auto market, a feat no company has matched since. GM was not just a manufacturer, it was an innovator. The company introduced the electric self-starter, automatic transmission, and the first airbags in production vehicles. Beyond cars, GM owned Frigidaire, built airplanes during World War II, developed heart pumps for medical use, and contributed to NASA's moon missions. GM's research labs were among the most advanced in the world, and its engineers set standards for the entire industry. Warning signs. Even as GM reigned supreme, trouble was brewing. In the 1970s, Japanese automakers like Toyota and Honda entered the U.S. market with cars that were smaller, more fuel-efficient, and more reliable than American models. GM, accustomed to dominance, was slow to respond. The oil crisis of 1973 exposed the vulnerability of GM's lineup, which was heavily weighted toward large, gas-guzzling vehicles. Quality issues began to erode public trust. The Chevy Vega, once hailed as a breakthrough, became notorious for recalls and reliability problems. Meanwhile, Japanese imports soared, and GM's market share began a slow but steady decline. GM's relationship with the United Auto Workers, UAW, was a double-edged sword. Strong unions secured high wages and generous benefits for workers, but these gains came with massive long-term costs. By the 2000s, GM was supporting more retirees than active employees, and the burden of pensions and healthcare costs became a crushing weight on the company's finances. The global financial meltdown of 2008 hit GM like a tidal wave. Car sales plummeted, and the company's fixed costs, factories, pensions, and healthcare remained stubbornly high. Years of declining market share, mounting debts, and a failure to adapt to changing consumer preferences left GM dangerously exposed. In June 2009, GM filed for bankruptcy, reporting $82 billion in assets and twice as much in liabilities. The U.S. government stepped in with a $50 billion bailout, saving over 1 million jobs but sparking fierce public debate. The bailout was controversial. Some saw it as a lifeline for American industry, others as a reward for decades of mismanagement. Emerging from bankruptcy, GM shed brands like Pontiac and Saturn, streamlined operations, and focused on its core strengths. In 2010, the company staged a historic initial public offering, IPO, raising over $20 billion and signaling a new era. Yet, the scars of bankruptcy and bailout lingered, and GM's reputation had taken a heavy blow. The 5 major reasons behind GM's decline. 1. Intensifying competition. In the early 20th century, GM faced limited competition, with Ford and Chrysler as its primary rivals. However, the landscape began to shift dramatically in the latter half of the century. Japanese automakers, particularly Toyota and Honda, entered the U.S. market with vehicles that were more reliable, fuel-efficient, and affordable than many American models. GM's reputation for quality began to suffer, most notably with the Chevy Vega in the 1970s, which faced widespread recalls due to manufacturing defects. The oil crisis of 1973 further accelerated the shift in consumer preferences toward smaller, more efficient cars, a segment dominated by Japanese imports, whose market share in the U.S. grew tenfold during the decade. By the 2000s, GM's dominance had eroded. In 2008, Toyota surpassed GM in global sales for the first time in over 75 years. Even in the U.S., GM's share fell from over 50% at its peak to under 20% by the 2020s. The company's inability to respond swiftly to competitive threats remains a central factor in its decline. 2. Stagnation in innovation. GM was once a beacon of innovation. The company introduced the first electric self-starter in the 1912 Cadillac, eliminating the need for hand cranks. In 1939, GM debuted the Hydra-Matic, the world's first fully automatic transmission, and in 1973, Oldsmobile offered the first airbags in a commercially sold vehicle. GM's influence extended beyond automobiles. The company owned Frigidaire for 6 decades, manufactured airplanes during World War II, developed the first medical heart pump in 1952, and contributed to NASA's lunar missions in the 1960s. In 1994, GM even helped launch DirecTV. Despite these achievements, GM has been criticized for complacency and a slow response to changing consumer demands. The company was late to embrace smaller, fuel-efficient, and alternative energy vehicles, remaining heavily reliant on SUVs and trucks. This resistance to change left GM exposed during periods of high gas prices and economic downturns, as seen in 2008 when soaring fuel costs and the recession slashed demand for their most profitable vehicles. 3. Erosion of public reputation. The government bailout, while saving over 1 million jobs, sparked intense public debate. Many Americans resented the use of taxpayer funds to rescue a corporation perceived as mismanaged and irresponsible. The stigma of too big to fail lingered, damaging GM's image among consumers, investors, and policymakers. GM's reputation suffered further blows from high-profile safety scandals. The most notorious was the 2014 ignition switch recall, which affected 2.7 million vehicles and was linked to over 100 deaths. Investigations revealed that GM had known about the defect for years but failed to act, leading to widespread outrage and a costly settlement in 2016. Today, GM continues to grapple with the legacy of its past missteps. Negative perceptions about quality, reliability, and corporate ethics persist, complicating efforts to rebuild trust and brand loyalty. 4. The impact of economic recession. The 2008 global financial crisis struck a devastating blow to GM. Industry-wide vehicle sales in the U.S. plummeted from 17 million to fewer than 10 million annually. GM, burdened by high fixed costs, massive pension obligations, and declining revenues, suffered staggering losses, over $81 billion in the 4 years leading up to its bankruptcy. On June 1, 2009, GM filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection, reporting $82 billion in assets against $172 billion in liabilities. This marked the 4th largest bankruptcy in U.S. history. The U.S. government intervened with a $50 billion bailout, acquiring a 60% stake in the company. GM emerged from bankruptcy as a leaner entity, discontinuing brands like Pontiac and Saturn and focusing on its core operations. Although GM staged a remarkable turnaround with a record-setting IPO in 2010, the company's market value and public trust never fully recovered. The government ultimately sold its remaining shares in 2013, incurring a loss of over $11 billion for taxpayers. 5. Escalating labor costs. GM's relationship with the United Auto Workers (UAW) union has been both a source of strength and a significant financial burden. Over the decades, the UAW negotiated higher wages, generous benefits, and strong job security for its members. Strikes, such as the 67-day walkout in 1970, highlighted the union's power and the company's vulnerability. By the early 2000s, GM faced the daunting challenge of supporting a massive retiree population. In 2005, the company reported supporting 3.2 retirees for every active employee. Between 1992 and 2007, GM paid over $100 billion in pension and healthcare costs for former employees. These legacy costs, combined with rising current labor expenses, severely hampered GM's ability to compete with non-unionized and more efficient rivals, particularly foreign automakers with lower labor costs. Even today, new labor contracts continue to increase GM's costs. The 2023 agreement with the UAW is expected to add $9.3 billion in expenses through 2028, further challenging the company's profitability and flexibility. General Motors' story is one of dramatic highs and painful lows. From its meteoric rise as the world's leading automaker to its struggle for relevance in a rapidly changing industry, GM's journey offers invaluable lessons on the importance of innovation, adaptability, and responsible corporate stewardship. Competition, failure to respond swiftly to new rivals, especially from Japan, eroded GM's market share. Labor costs, generous union contracts, and massive legacy obligations undermine financial flexibility. Innovation, early leadership in technology gave way to complacency and missed opportunities. Economic shocks, the 2008 recession exposed deep structural weaknesses, leading to bankruptcy and a controversial bailout. Reputation, safety scandals and public backlash over the bailout continue to haunt the company. General Motors remains a fascinating case study in American business history, a testament to both the power and perils of industrial ambition. As the company navigates the challenges of the 21st century, its legacy serves as both a warning and an inspiration for future generations of innovators and leaders.